Thanks again, Antonio, once more time. And our next talk, Dr. Vasiliki Athanasakou from St. Mary's University in Halifax, Canada. So Vasiliki is an associate professor in accounting and has a track record of working with financial narratives, financial reporting quality, and the impact of regulation on capital market and organizational performance. So Vasiliki has been a joint member in the first work done in Lancaster on financial narratives back in 2012. So she has a very good experience in the kind of joint work between NLP and accounting and finance. So Vasiliki, ready when you are.
Oh, thank you, Mahmoud. It is a pleasure. Thank you so much, you and Paul, for the invitation. It is a true pleasure to present. I would have liked to be there, and since I did my PhD in Manchester, I love the north of the UK, but given COVID, I have tried to keep my traveling to minimum. So I'm affiliated to St. Mary's University in Canada, but I have the blessing of making this presentation from beautiful Greece. So I'm visiting my parents, and this is my morning and my evening view, because I'm booked in a hotel to give this presentation. Just on a pleasant note, and my smile is kind of a given whenever I'm here. This is the way I smile. Okay, so the presentation, I am going to largely draw from a paper that I am working on with my beloved colleagues Yasmin Zayed and Lisa Gove. We started this paper back when we were all three of us at the LSE. And I'm going to use that paper and then draw and highlight some implications for NFP research. So I know you told me I could present the paper. I would be happy to give a lot of details on the paper on another instance, but today I'm going to keep the paper, highlight the findings, the reason, the motivation, the findings, and then focus on the implications for financial narratives research. So how it all started, we kind of, I am an accountant, so Yasmin and Lisa are also an accountant, and as Johan said, we are working on unstructured data. This is how we met, Mahmoud, so analyzing annual report narratives. Now this work is more like deep. Now, bear in mind, one of the co-authors is a qualitative researcher, so they go the basic research questions, like who really prepares the annual report? And just when you think you have the answer for this, you really don't. So there's a lot of work, recent work on highlighting on the different people that are involved in drafting the annual report narratives, not just the CEO, but the CFO, the secretary, and actually the implications of having so many different people involved in the properties of the narratives and how impossible it is to get the story right given this mix. And then just when you think you have pinned down the insiders, there goes the outsiders, because we know for a fact that auditors are involved and lawyers, but then we actually discovered there is an important new segment operating in the UK, and that is a new layer of intermediation in core reporting added by corporate reporting consultants or corporate reporting agencies. So we said, okay, we need to really explore those agencies. How big are they? Those agencies are not new. They have started operating from back in the 1960s, but back then it was mainly that they had a say on they kind of contributed in the style and the design of the report rather than anything else. But very gradually, and over the last 10 years, 15 years for that matter, they have a strong kind of a more intervention role. So they provide advice not only to the content of the reports, of the narratives, but also on the process of preparing the narratives. So these are what we call the content shaping corporate reporting agents. And this is why we use the term Shakespeare, because essentially they become very important in shaping the content of the report and the value creation story. So we portray them as the dramaturgs of the value creation story, standing next to the CEOs in some sort of way. And they have a say on different matters. They can have a say on space planning, on how to position the messages within the annual report, on how to link the messages across the report. And of course, they also have a say on tone and language. And we thought, okay, we really need to see what is going on. So we designed the paper to examine their role and to kind of shed light on the phenomenon, and then to see what is their use, what is the impact of those agents on the narratives, on the annual report narratives of British firms where we detected the phenomenon. So we did the pilot, and then we said, okay, let's see how big this phenomenon is. And it's a new market, so we kind of detected that on the Fuji All-Share Index of around 600 firms per year for the period of 2003 to 2014, almost 75% of firms actually hired an agent to put together a report. Not all of them were content shaping, some of them were, but the market seems to largely concentrate as the top 3 agents control almost 20% of the market of the Fuji All-Share Index, and with, of course, many other agencies there controlling a significant part of 30%, leaving only 25% of the Fuji All-Shares not engaging any of the agents. And then we thought that, okay, let's see what is going on. Is the phenomenon growing? And then we graphed and we actually observed a rise in the hiring of corporate reporting agents that is largely actually due by those that actually have and engage in the content shaping of the narratives. So why is this so important? Like in the UK, you know, and I'm sure a lot of people in the industry know how the annual report is so vital to conveying the annual the value creation story. Now, Johan made reference to the 10Ks. The 10Ks are much different than the UK setting in the sense that the annual report in Britain is the one-stop for all the information that a company can give about how it creates value. Unlike the 10K, because in the US, there are different filings that our companies have put and combined together to get the whole story out there. So it is essentially the annual report in Britain is the ultimate communication channel. And who else is there? The regulators, the Financial Reporting Council and government bodies are quite vocal in leading what practices in the annual report and what is really recommended best practices on the narratives. So they have been somehow bombarding the UK firms with a number of initiatives on what to include on those narratives. And you may think that the firms do not care, but actually they quite care. And if anything, we say that the UK firms race to the top when it comes to disclosure practices in the narratives. Why? Because there are bodies actually in Britain, including PwC, Investor Relations Society and Communicate Magazine, that actually award firms for their annual report narratives. And just to give you a glance on what do they value, here's a couple of examples. This is from Fuji 100 firm, and the comment is that they awarded the firm because the report had clarity. A particular highlight was that the business model and strategy section, which flows into clear performance indicators and a clear overview of risk management. So risk, obviously, reporting of risk is quite crucial. But if you see 3 times the mention of the word clarity is quite important. And then on a Fuji 250 firm, again, the issue of clear themes. I really like that comment here, how the judge, before awarding that firm, said that it was a real treat to read. So readability, clarity, engaging, a report that engages with the audience, quite important. So we know that UK firms care, and essentially this is an opportunity that the CRAs grasped And they started very actively shaping conceptions of best practice. They didn't stay passive. They didn't say, okay, we can give you expert advice. They started shaping the best practice. How did they do that? So they basically started forming roundtables, workshops, giving their own research to regulators. And of course, what did they have? They had a pool, they had a corpus of UK annual reports, and they could perform benchmarking, right? So they could sell that expertise. So they started promoting themselves as an expert on advice on how to get the narratives right. And essentially also kind of offering a stamp of assurance, if anything, that could actually, the UK firms could add. And where would they add it? Where do we even detect those agencies? We detect them in the annual report at the very last page, where if any company has hired an agent, in the very last page, they would indicate the logo. And because it's a logo, we couldn't do automatic text search to actually detect if the company's engaging. We had to do this annually because they have logos and not real text in the PDF. Most of the time. Sometimes it was in text, but not all the time. So to avoid data attrition, we did this manually. As a phenomenon, we collected the engaging of the CRAs manually. Now, are they a boon or a curse? Or can they, like, if you hire the help, you may as well get some benefits from it. So in principle, of course, if you do hire the CRAs, you expect there is some benefit. And the content shaping ones, of course, because they have a say on the reporting process, they could yield benefits. And if anything, if they can help the firm provide signal assurance about the content of the annual report in terms of compliance with the regulatory initiatives, this is lowering the risk. So there is the benefits can be emanating either as lower risk or higher efficiency gains, because if they may actually give some advice on how to streamline the reporting process. So they may be even some savings in the cost savings in the internal reporting process, but it doesn't come without a cost. And other than the fees that they ask for, which could even elevate to the level of audit fees in some cases, there is also the issue that just their expert advice, and because they do give sometimes disclosure templates to firms, it may well be that actually they introduce noise or misleading information instead of doing good for the business. So it's not quite clear that they can have a beneficial impact. So what did we find? We find that indeed UK firms do engage and involve CRAs, and the main reason behind this is their demand for legitimacy. And that is also translated whenever their firms have poor corporate governance, they are more likely to seek the advice of the CRAs in drafting the reports. Of course, we followed a very interesting methodology to say, okay, if we take narratives, financial reporting narratives, and pick up the common suspects of things that seem to matter based on prior research, like readability or the value creation story, can we detect that they have an impact? Can we detect that they have an incremental impact over and above the firm impact of the CEO or the top management team impact? So for us to have a story, right? So we included a number of indices here, some of which you may recognize, others are more new, some are completely novel, because that notion of consistency across sections and that story of, the clarity and the cohesiveness of the story that they promote so much, we wanted to capture that. So we created some new index capturing the consistency of the story across sections. And we also have an overall disclosure index that we examine. And we actually saw in very, very simple terms that almost 5%, obviously the narratives are mostly explained by firm fixed effects, but the CRA fixed effects are not negligible, and they are even above industry fixed effects, and they're higher and reaching 2 to 5%. So what do they do? Well, obviously, the engaging of the content-shaping CRAs are actually associated with more readable narratives. And then we also saw that the CRAs are actually the agencies lead to reports that are provide a more lengthy and more consistent value creation commentary. And they also associate with higher levels of disclosure. More interestingly, though, we followed recent work published in the European Accounting Review that shows that actually getting the content of the annual report right is not straightforward. And it takes time, and that firms learn and that they adjust to optimal disclosure over time. And the regulation is it's also a boon and a curse, because sometimes it's good to have the guidance, but sometimes regulatory initiatives may end up actually in an information overload. So given those kind of delaying factors in reaching optimal disclosure, we investigated whether CRAs can help, and we documented that the agents could indeed help and help firms adjust to optimal disclosure levels and reduce information overload. So this is the paper. I would be happy to share and discuss it more, but what I want to do the rest of my talk is talk about the implications for financial narrative processing research. Well, given my background also, I'm an accountant and also spent 10 years at the LSE, so I will start with theories. I'm assuming that theories, of course, are leading the hypothesis in most of the papers. So essentially, one of the things that I have seen even in recent working papers is examining financial narratives is that they make associations with the traits, the personality traits of the CEO, for example, or the culture of the company or the governance of the company. Essentially, what our paper does is introduces an additional layer, an additional messenger in the process. And it could well be that there is an external intermediary involved that has an impact on the narratives, on the message of the narratives, and that cannot be neglected. So ultimately, we don't know who is the Shakespeare behind the annual report, and if it is more or less the CEO or the company or the CRA has some sort of spillover effects. And in essence, we cannot attribute all of the traits, all of the report properties, the financial narrative properties to the top management team. The second implication is we have to start talking about costs. Because we do talk a lot about properties of narratives and benefits, reporting regulation and benefits. What we said like here is the costs, right? Because hiring a CRA introduces costs, either direct, which is the fees, or indirect. So conceptually, we have to also consider introducing more and more guidance when it comes to reporting regulation may also introduce this indirectly cost to the reporting process. And it's not quite clear that the benefits could outweigh those costs. Another thing, of course, that we need to take into account is that there is the possibility that CRAs are not really well-meaning, in the sense that to the extent you add someone in the equation, and it's not just the CEO or the CFO or the top management team, it's another group of people, and they have their own incentives and their own information asymmetry drivers. So that may interfere with the quality of their services and how much noise they may end up introducing in their reports, or even error in their reports. So that needs to be taken into and caution, futurism to caution when thinking about the incentives underlying the narratives. Now, from a more FNP perspective, the thing that really struck me is that we don't have much guidance on how to capture disclosure models, pro forma models, because those companies come in and they even promote that they can help. This is drawing from a website of our corporate reporting agent. So they say, we can help you articulate your investment case. So we can give, you almost implied they can give you a disclosure model. And we don't really know how we could go about capturing a disclosure model. So will it be similarity? We know notions of cosine similarity, but how can we capture all these dimensions of a model, a pro forma disclosure model for the narratives of the annual reports? Because then we will have to also capture similarity in layouts and similarity perhaps in language and tone and combine all three together. So this is something that future research could start thinking about, especially since it could have different implications, because the more homogenized and disclosure models are not necessarily leading to better disclosure. So it's really interesting if we can get our hands on capturing those models. A new notion that we're trying to get through in the paper, and I thought it was very interesting for FNP, I'm sorry, is the notion of consistency and linkage. I have another paper that I was planning to present, which captures that notion quite explicitly. So from an accounting perspective, when I'm talking to non-accounting people, the ISB and quite a lot, like for 10 years, FRC in Britain is talking about the notion of consistency and linkage. So you go into a report and there is a story, and I mean, Johan also talked about the bias of the story and the quality of the story, right? So, and the quality of the story is not just how lengthy it is and how positive it is or how optimistic it is, it's also how solid it is. So one of the things that the regulators are trying to put forward is the notion that you need to link that story, with the numbers. So this disclosure model where all the sections, the risks, the strategy, the resources, they come together and they're linked with the financial performance is quite important, but it's something we are not able to capture at the moment because there's a lot of emphasis on tone and length and semantics that lead to one way or the other to the term, but not so much on the notion of consistency. Now, in this paper, we introduced the notion of volatility of scores across sections. So to the extent you have an annual report text and you can do a section breakdown, you can see how much consistency there is of a commentary across sections. You can do this using volatility measures, or you can do this using positioning measures, which is another textual method, or you can even just see how much commentary is within each section, how much is the overlap, basically, the integration of messages, what I call them. The final thing I want to learn, just fruit for thought, is the notion of cohesiveness. And it's not consistency per se, it's the notion of how cohesive is the message in the annual report and the narratives. If we take it for given that we have multiple players, I remember the FRC organized a conference a couple of years ago, and it was a group of CFOs, a group of investors, and they were all saying how difficult it is to get a cohesive message across because there's no agreement within the firm. So it would be so awesome if we were able to capture how many messages using NLP methods, how many messages exist in these narratives, how many? So in other words, would have been a meaningless measure of cohesion and clarity, because essentially cohesion is a matter of, and a clear message assumes that even if there are many messages, that there is a clear consensus of how the company creates value. So this is a very interesting notion. I know there is linguistic research that actually does work on this. Unfortunately, accounting has not kept up with it, so it would be great if there is more into this in the future. So to summarize, the three things that I call for future research to think is that whenever we think about narratives, I mean, Johan made the same point about the market and the news. Obviously, the messenger is important. When we do an annual report, we assume the messenger is the firm, but it's not only the firm. It's different people within the firm and perhaps different people outside the firm. So the multiplicity of messengers is something that needs to be taken into account. and embracing more properties rather than just tone and length and semantics and the content is the notion of consistency. When it comes to an annual report, it's not just what you say, it's how it actually comes together as a story. So this storytelling is quite crucial for us accountants. So anything that NLP can give us, help us do to capture this cohesiveness and clarity of the story is really awesome. And also considering the joint impact of all those things, right? So just because you're saying something in a much lengthy and extensive way does not really mean it's clear, and does not really mean it's well tied up with everything that you do as a firm in terms of your numbers, right? So, and the final takeaway is that we need to take into account the costs, because essentially CRAs are imposing a cost. Ideally, because what they bring is expertise, and they obtain this expertise from the pool of clients that they have, AI, conceptually at least, provides an alternative, because a firm can have in-house expertise collating all those other disclosure models that exist out there. So they don't need CRAs, but one way or the other, that imposes a cost in the reporting process, and something worth considering. I'm not so sure how we're doing time-wise, Mahmoud, but this is my talk. I hope I left some time for questions, and I have two great pictures from Money, Greece, yeah. I hope this is leaving a nice note.
Thanks a lot, Vasiliki. This is actually very interesting, and I do love those pictures. Very endless.
Come on. It has to be. I know. So you know, this is a place in Peloponnese that's quite rocky, and it's so beautiful because it's not greeny, as you see. No green, no trees. It's famous. It's notorious for its rocks, and the building of towers, obviously, as you see in the picture. And it's really, the pictures are now, right? So the next to it is the main area of Aeropoli, which is in Peloponnese, quite a big town actually. And this is how the buildings still look there, which is really amazing.
I mean, can hardly compete with a sunny day in Lancaster, but yeah.
I know. This explains my smile all the time, you know. Whenever I'm here, vis-a-vis, we meet also virtually, Mahmoud, so you know how I smile when I'm in, you know, anywhere else, let's say.
Always smiling, Vasiliki, but I can tell like it's slightly bigger in Greece.
It's slightly bigger, yes, it's slightly bigger.
Awesome. Okay, so this is actually very interesting. I really like to know more about this, the use of CRAs, and it kind of like, it's like an eye-opening research for those interested to know how these annual reports are actually formed, because we like naively sometimes think like the company has done a lot of effort writing like each part completely in-house, but it looks like they do hire external agencies. I like that view, Paul. See, Vasiliki, it kind of competes with us a little bit.
It actually builds on what we did, because we did this work on extracting the narratives and rating the value creation story. And just when you think you can make an attribution to the company, you have to think of the external people that are involved, and this is the base your contribution. It's also, this paper is also very heavily implying things for regulation, but I'm not highlighting this as much as what is relevant for NFP research. But I just want to, since you're mentioning, this is what they promote themselves as, like, we can help you. Did you see the slide with the investment? We can help you get your story right. So essentially they are promoting themselves as storytellers. This is why we use Shakespeare, is like almost, you know, they're writing the script.
True. I mean, there's a very good question from Jochen in the messages, and I'll read George's question after that. So I'll try to summarize Jochen's question, but what he says is, with the use of CRAs, there might be like lots of information, less diversity in the language, So what do you think
Sorry,
of
I had
that?
an interruption. Sorry.
Shall I try again?
I'm so sorry. You have to repeat what you said in the last minute because I had a minor fall in my Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I said there's interesting question from Jochen about the use of CRAs. So to summarize that question, he says, do you think that the use of CRAs like is kind of reducing the diversity and like adds like a loss of information because it's very carefully written by a certain like agency in that case?
So
yeah.
They may add, one of the things that was coming in the full, the complexity, if I'm not mistaken, they may add complexity. This is one, if you read the paper, one of the things is that by actually imposing a disclosure model, they may end up convoluting the story and adding unnecessary clutter. So it is possible. Yes, it is possible. And this is why we sought out to investigate whether indeed they could, and they do provide the assurance, the assurance they provide is real or actually a label. Because it could be that you signal that your report is fine and you get all your disclosure awards, but it's just a label, right? Especially if you have a big name. So yes, they do. And they do. And one of the issues that it was in the implications is that this complexity needs to be taken into account. One of the things to tease it out, to identify it, I think empirically, you have to dig into the incentives. So if they do add complexity, it may well be in cases where incentives are also convoluted either way, in the firm or in the agency.
Thanks, Vasiliki. There's also another good question, also from Greece, but this one is Athens. So George Giannakopoulos is one of the organizers of this workshop on the summarization part of the financial narratives. So his question says that, based on your experience, would you expect human evaluators of consistency and cohesiveness, etc., to be able to quantify these qualities consistently? Could they agree with each other, do you think?
This is a good point, George. And I'm not rushing into coming to Athens. I quite like the south and being next to the sea. This is quite an interesting point. We have a paper where we are, Mahmoud, you may know, the attribution bias, where we see how much machine learning can help. And we have found that the more complex the concept, the less possible that machine learning and AI can help. I agree with you. It is a very subtle notion, the notion of consistency. This is how we have tried to quantify it. How successful we are is still an empirical issue. We're still in the process of this. But we have not at the moment considered a human evaluator, so manual evaluators, although we are thinking this as a separate validation. So yes, we are. It's a complex construct, right? It's not not easy to say yes, they are together. But you would be amazed, even if you plug in. I have some MBA students that I use, and I actually ask them to evaluate the cohesiveness of the story. And they do come up with different evaluations. That's true. Sometimes, and as you say, you wouldn't have, of course, the golden classifications, but it's a worthwhile task taking in the future.
Thanks a lot, Vasiliki. That's actually really good, interesting. All right, so one more question from Paul. So Paul says, do you think a CRA would ever let us see behind the scenes with the full track changes, an example, reports that they've worked on to polish
right.
and style? And
that's in an ideal world. I just love the way. Okay, I have to say some things here on their honor. First of all, the lack of data exists from the firm level. We cannot know what they did. The firm does not even disclose the fees. We don't know the fees. It's only from interviews that we can get an idea about the fees, because the fees are actually aggregated, right? They're not disclosed. So we don't know what the intervention they do. The way, and because I didn't have time to go through how we identify them. We identify them by looking at the CRA websites and what they offer, okay? So we can get an idea of what they offer on a broad way through the websites and how intervening and through personal interviews with them. But I would never, that would be so awesome if they could let us have. The good news is they are very open to collaborating with academics. I have been impressed by how helpful they have been with us. But point taken, I think my co-author is here, and so maybe looking at your comment, and so maybe calling one of the CRA heads, say okay. But I'm not sure optimistic about the answer to this question. It would be awesome if we can get that unstructured data, how much they add, right? But that would also open a can of worms for the companies.
On that topic, and also this question by Jochen, so my question is, do you know if they have like different level of service? Like, do they have silver, gold, and platinum kind of service?
Yeah, that's a good point, Mahmoud. What they call and promote themselves is that they could intervene like from the beginning to the end of the process. They have not, at least looking at the websites or talking to them, they have not implied a category, like an order on how much you can get, you know. So a kind of quantifying of the level of intervention. So I cannot answer that question if they do. I guess, though, my guess is that this is quite dynamic, because before engaging, before getting the job, there is a lot of communications with the firm where they start getting familiar. So I think what they provide is more of a customized package to each firm. And I guess this package will depend on how much the firm can afford as well. So if it's a bigger firm, they will aim for a bigger package. So the notion of the relationship that exists between the CRA and the firm is quite crucial. They build a lot of trusts before actually hiring them, because essentially you can understand how sensitive the information is, that it's going to flow either way.
Yeah, I think there were like a lot of NDAs involved. But yeah, that's actually a good answer. I think the main mystery is that we don't know, as Paul asked, what's happening in the backstage, but that is true, and still interesting at the same time.
Essentially, Paul, just to come back, because I really like Paul's idea, essentially with what I'm trying to do, and I would love to do, is to get my hands on this or the disclosure models that they have, because I'm sure there is some templates, and of course this is their expertise, they wouldn't share with us, but the notion of, we do believe there is a model, the performer disclosure models, and this is what is really triggering, challenging our thoughts at the moment.
Yeah, you might have mentioned that in your presentation, but do you have a record of companies that used CRAs, let's see, in the future sometime, and then before that, so if you can do a comparison of like text to use, stuff like that?
Yeah, we do, because we have a CRA hiring and CRA discontinuation. And this is definitely providing a good setting for us to see what is going on those. Obviously, on the hiring, there is much more taking place. But what is a challenge for us, so you know, is that it's not easy. Their impact is not easy to quantify. And if I want to, since you're asking things that are more accounting, like questions driven, this is the challenge they're facing, proving that they could yield benefits to the company, because their benefits may take long or very difficult to quantify what they bring to the company. So what you haven't seen is the graph that actually shows that there is some sort of decay in their hiring services, because I think the companies are starting being skeptical about their benefits. It's an interesting thing, whatever is happening, and a lot of I think cross-jurisdictional other countries would want to know and learn from Britain as a phenomenon, because while investor relation departments are quite widespread, this is quite new and especially at sea localized in the UK at the moment. So it's really interesting to inform internationally.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Vasiliki. Just give you an applause from our tiny team here. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
We look to hear more from you and the other speakers in the panel later today.
Yes.
There'll be more interesting topics to discuss.